Thank you all for your patience.
Yes. So I still am not seeing Jack.
Mr. Chair, if you want to give it a couple minutes, we can, or you can start. I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, my suggestion is you do have a quorum, so you can start at your leisure, Chair.
Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so my clock says 7:03. I'd like to start at 7:05, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Okay, give me just, we're getting some reverb, so give us just a second. Throw me off. Oh, this is not fun. Sorry, guys. Okay.
Nice dog.
Okay, mine just went off screen. There it goes.
Stacy, I don't know if this helps, but I just went to the link to the website and I do see a picture of you there. It's a view.
Yeah, I think it's all working. We're all broadcasting live on YouTube, and which should be on our webpage as well.
Yeah, I'm on the web page and I think I'm seeing Stacy's dog.
Yeah, so there is, just to remind everyone, there is a 20-second delay between what we see and what gets put on YouTube and on the webpage.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 7:06. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Stacy, you're muted.
Go ahead, Case.
Go ahead. Chair Schaefer asked to call the roll. I'm
Yep.
sure for that.
On my way. Commissioner Duncan?
Absent.
No, can you guys hear me? I'm not muted.
Yes, he's absent.
Okay, yep. Commissioner Flowers?
Present.
Commissioner Engel?
Here.
Commissioner Longo-Messino?
Here.
Commissioner Van Duker?
Here.
Commissioner Vice Chair Sheeler?
Here.
Chair Schaefer?
Here.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, would you please put up the flag on the screen? And Vice Chair Sheeler, will you lead us in the
This is
Pledge of
awful.
Allegiance?
Is she gonna put the flag up or is it up?
Not up yet.
Having technical difficulties.
Sorry guys, I'm getting really bad delay in the headset. So everything, I'm hearing everything like 4 times, and we're trying to figure out how to resolve this. Oh, I
Plug the headset.
don't know.
Okay.
You are not minimized. Okay. Well, I'm trying to get the PowerPoint up. This is a total, I don't know.
Okay, are we ready for the flag salute?
Yes.
Yes, please.
I pledge allegiance
To
To the flag
Flag
of the United
United
States,
States of America,
The United States of America and to the
and to the
republic for
republic
which
for which it stands,
one nation,
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for
for
all.
all.
Can you?
Madam Secretary, please read the next agenda item. May I have the next agenda item, please?
Public comment. Under Government Code Section 54954.3, members of the audience may address the commission on any agenda item within the jurisdiction of the commission or any agenda item. Those wishing to speak on non-agenda items will be called upon at the beginning of the meeting. Those wishing to speak for or against the agenda item will be called upon after the presentation by the City Planning Department for the applicant for that agenda item.
We have no comments in the inbox at this point. And just so you know, commissioners, folks can email their comments, and I'm checking our inbox regularly.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the next agenda item.
Consent calendar, approval of minutes for February 26, 2020.
I move that we accept the minutes for 2020, or January meeting. Is that right?
Are there do any of the commissioners want to make any changes to the minutes?
In that case, I move that we accept the minutes as written.
I'll second.
Commissioner Lagomarsino has moved that we accept the minutes. Commissioner Sheeler has seconded.
Okay.
Call the.
Can I call the roll, please?
Commissioner Flowers,
Yes.
Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomarsino,
Aye.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler,
Yes.
Chair Schaefer.
Yes.
Item passed, unanimous.
Madam Secretary, may I have the next agenda item?
Public hearing, item A, Lord's Grace Church expansion, 7227 Canolo Hills Drive. Applicant is requesting approval of planning of use permit and design review permit modification to allow for the placement of 2 modular classrooms onto the existing church property located at 7227 Canola Hills Drive, Citrus Heights. This environmental determination, the project is categorically exempt from CEQA per section 15303 of California Environmental Quality Act under construction or conservation of small structures. Project planner, Eric Singer.
Thanks, Stacy. Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So good evening, everyone. Hopefully the rest of this is going to go fairly smoothly, but as Stacy mentioned, the item tonight is the applicant is proposing to place 2 prefabricated modular classroom buildings on their church property. The buildings will be used essentially as classrooms in conjunction with Sunday services, as well as any potential additional gatherings or conferences for the congregation. It's going to be located in the roughly northeastern section of the property in an open grassy area next to the church itself. And the buildings will, while not modified, the buildings will be surrounded by a stucco wall with some landscape screening to help shield them from the public view shed. So again, the actions to consider tonight will be accepting that the CEQA exemption under section 15303 is the correct environmental review, and then the approval of the use permit and the design review modification permit. So this is the proposed site area. The area highlighted here in red is where the modular units will go. And actually, in addition to the modular units, the applicant is also proposing a small basketball court just to the west of the church here. The basketball church is kind of an auxiliary use and was not considered as part of necessarily the design review permit modification or use permit as the primary need for the hearing tonight. However, we are including it as an item that should be reviewed at the same time. So looking at looking at the church from Canelo Hills, this is the view. And in the boxed area here is where they're proposing to put these 2 prefabricated units. These are the units themselves. As I mentioned, the applicant has not said that they're going to be modifying them in any way, so no change in color or materials. However, as you'll see in a second here, they are meeting essentially the findings for a design review permit by the fact that this is going to be going in conjunction with a landscape wall to help kind of shield that from the public view shed. And looking at the site plan here, as you can see, they are proposed to go into this grassy area. And then the perimeter here is the proposed wall, and then the buffer of landscape screening next to that with some ornamental fencing and some access gates. And then again, here to the west is that proposed basketball court. So here are the proposed elevations. This is, again, as if you were to look at the church from Canelo Hills. You can see just the top essentially of the modular units would be kind of peeking out. However, the color of the units themselves is relatively in keeping with the kind of the color palette of the existing church, and the materials are not terribly far off from what's already there. And then with the addition of a stucco wall, as well as the ornamental fencing and then the landscape screening in front, we have found that would suffice to meet all the findings of the design review permit. Looking at it from the north, this is as if you were standing on the property that is the senior care facility just to the north of the church and looking south. This is the view that you would get. So again, a continuation of that stucco wall, and then the ornamental landscaping and the fence with an access gate. So, in a little bit deeper dive within the staff report, you'll see how it meets all the findings. But essentially, it does meet certain goals outlined in the general plan, including providing facilities for local community gatherings and youth and family activities. We found that, again, that CEQA exemption, so it's the new construction or conversion of small structures, is the appropriate level of environmental review for this type of application. And ultimately, the combination of all the factors that we're looking at tonight will suffice to meet the findings for the use permit as well as the design review permit. So it's consistent with the development, the landscaping, and the design standards and the zoning code. So here are staff's recommended motions, and I am available to answer any questions, as well as the applicant is available to answer any questions that any of you may have. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Eric. Do we have any comments from the commissioners? That would be questions or comments for staff.
No comments.
No comment.
I do have a couple of comments with regard to the outline of the goals that we had set up. I'm looking at specifically goal 23. Specifically, the church, before this particular entity purchased the church allowed the community to use the facilities for the neighborhood meeting. Since then, that really the facilities really haven't been available for use for any community gatherings or so I really have questions about number one, what whether we're really fulfilling that goal or not, that particular one. So the next item that I had some concerns about was the size of the stucco wall being 8 feet tall. To me, that seems a little, it just seems a little tall, and it gives it a feel of more of a compound than the facility of a wall. I'd like to know from the applicant, certainly. Well, this is questions for staff, so I can propose that to the applicant when the appropriate time. But those, I would just question for staff how clearly we've reviewed that. Was staff aware that the facility was, since this particular group has taken over the facility, that's really not available to, say, the neighborhood association to hold their meetings there, which is what they did before.
Apologies for that. So that was actually a comment that was received from a neighbor to the church, directly across the church. So I did pose that question to the applicant, and he said that he was willing to answer any of those questions. So Tim, would you like to take over here?
Yes, thank you so much, commissioners. Thank you for your time this evening, and also a big thank you to Eric.
Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt, but was this the applicant speaking?
I'm Tim Alatorre. Yes, I'm the architect representing the applicant.
Yeah, we need to go through commission comments or questions and then open the public hearing before we hear from the applicant.
Would you like me to respond to the specific question or wait until later? I'm fine waiting if you'd like.
I think we should probably wait until the public hearing is opened.
I would agree with that.
Thank you.
Jennifer, I had a question as well for Eric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
go
this
ahead.
this may be another question that we can address to the applicant, but the basketball court, can you illustrate again where the location of that is in proximity to the senior living center?
Yeah, so if you look at the site plan here, it is approximately, I'm afraid I do not have the actual measurements of the distance of the basketball court to the property line. I think if you're going to measure that in conjunction to where the setback lines are, roughly that 5-foot setback, I would imagine it's probably somewhere in the ballpark of 25 to 30 feet from the property line. The adjacent senior care facility to that property line is actually the width of it's multiple stalls. So it's 2 widths of car stalls as well as a drive aisle. In between those two, Tim might have the actual the specific length of that distance between the two. And sorry, just one more thing. One of the items that we can consider as well is conditioning some hours of operation on the basketball court itself so that it doesn't pose any kind of a noise or light or any of that type of nuisance to the adjacent senior care facility.
So one of the advantages of Zoom is you can measure on the computer a little easier. It looks like it's about 125 feet approximately from the basketball court to the edge of the building where the senior care facility is at.
And does the wall that you're speaking about extend all the way down between that and the adjacent property, between the basketball court and the senior care center?
It does not. The wall actually ends at the church itself. It actually turns into a gate and then meets with the building of the church itself.
So at this point, there's no barricade between the property of the senior center and where the proposed basketball court would go?
I believe that is correct.
Does the city have any, the staff have anything in regards to, I guess you said there's a noise ordinance that measure that you're putting in place for that?
Right. So as I mentioned, we can condition the project to have hours of operations for the basketball court itself. So essentially that it doesn't encroach into the noise, I should say the hours that the noise ordinance would take effect, which is typically 7 a.m. to I believe 10 p.m. But then we can also cater those hours of operation to be more conducive to that adjacent use being a senior care facility.
And the last question I had, is the entire property fenced or is it just well, maybe you could just answer that.
So if you look here on the view from Google Maps, the entire site is not fenced. So where they're proposing the fence and the wall would really encapsulate just that the grassy area that's highlighted within the yellow box there.
So there would be no restriction for anyone to come in and use the basketball facilities. Is that correct?
There would be no physical barrier that would impede the use. Whether or not that would be enforced by the owners of the property is a different story, and I would, excuse me, let the applicant speak to that.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Of course.
I did have a question for Eric as well in regards to the stucco wall, and you're talking about screening landscape, right? So you're talking bushes or trees or whatever. I saw the stucco wall as 6 feet, and personally I was thinking it wasn't tall enough. When I drove down just before our meeting today just to take a peek at the rest of the neighborhood, and I noticed the care facility next door has got wrought iron with ivy, and it's like, I don't know how tall it was. It was at least 8, if not taller. And in my opinion, for the neighbors, at least across the way, it would be much more appealing to see that kind of continue. And it looked like it was a plan, Stucco walls are not that attractive, and it's covering up a building that's unattractive, So I don't know if that's something that we could consider having you look at.
Yes, and we are conditioning it so that prior to issuance of any building permits, the landscape plan will need to be approved by planning staff. What they're currently proposing, and I can let Tim speak to this in maybe a little bit more depth, but just from reading their proposed plant list, they have columnar ginkgo, dogwood, Japanese elm, many of these showing anywhere between a 12 to 30 foot diameter, 15-year mark. And in terms of the evergreen wall screening shrubs, you're seeing everything from pittosporum to white gardenias, longleaf mahonia. In essence, I will probably let Tim, I think, speak to the extent to which these landscape shrubs and whatnot will actually be able to cover the extent of the wall. But I do agree that we can definitely look at, a continuation of the adjacent sites landscaping so that there is that sense of continuity.
Yeah, I think it would really I thought it would just look a lot better.
I would just point out that it's about 85 feet from the sidewalk to where the fence will be approximately. So maybe sort of the height is a little bit different because the next door senior care facility, the fence is right on the back of sidewalk approximately. So a little bit different character.
Yeah.
We have any other commissioner questions or clarifications from staff?
I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't there like 16 basketball courts to the north of this site, about the same distance?
If you're speaking about the, I believe it's the tech center that's just north of here.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Okay. I mean, if there's already basketball courts near the site, I'm not sure that the additional one would make that much difference. That's all.
Do you have any other comments for staff? With that, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing, and I'll ask the applicant to step forward for a couple of questions.
Great, thank you very much, Chairman. Would it be okay for me to respond to some of the questions, or?
Yes, please. That'd be great.
Fantastic. Well, as I was saying previously, thank you so much for making this possible tonight with the shutdown and everything that's going on. I really appreciate the effort that the city staff has made, and for all of you to be here tonight. And as I mentioned, Eric and the rest of the staff have been very helpful and informative in this whole process. I think as it relates to the basketball court in particular, and your question, Chairman, about the use of the space for public purposes, maybe a little background on this project. So the building was built in 1964, and there's been very little work that's been done on it since that point. There hasn't been any significant remodels. A lot of the facilities are original to the 1960s. And Lord's Grace Chinese Church recently acquired the building, and their congregation is growing. And what's wonderful is our congregation is growing a lot with children and with teenagers. And the current facilities don't accommodate those demographics very well. The back portion of the site on the west side behind the existing building is actually fenced in currently. That's where the basketball court is to be proposed. I think I can annotate here on the screen, but there's currently a fence that follows that line. I'm not sure if you can see my annotation there. And that is currently being used as a playground for the younger children. And one of the problems the church is having right now is they have a growing congregation, and there's no place for the older children or the teenagers to congregate. There's one large common room, a couple of small little classrooms, and then some small child like nursery facilities. And so what they're hoping to do here is these two relocatable classrooms are actually being gifted to them from another church school in the Bay Area. And that was what really instigated this project. And so they want to use those two classrooms to house the older children and the teenagers and give them a place where they can congregate and strengthen and bond with each other. And so the basketball court would be used for those teenagers during their regular meeting times. So this would be on Sundays primarily. And it's not a full court, it's just a hoop and some hard top for them to bounce the ball around on. It wouldn't be a full court basketball facility. And that would be within the locked playground area that's currently existing, so it wouldn't be open to the public. And really, this project is a temporary one. When we first brought this proposal to city staff, we made it very clear that these classrooms are a temporary measure while the church raises funds to build a new facility on the southern portion of the lot in that large open field. And their big plan is to build a new sanctuary there and then do the necessary upgrades to this existing 1964 building, bring it up to current code and make it classroom space. And then those relocatable classrooms would be then removed from the site as part of that phase 2 project. And so what we're hoping to accomplish with this proposed project with these classrooms is allow the congregation a little breathing room so they can grow, so they can keep their current membership and excite the congregation to raise funds for this second project. As it relates to the height of the wall, we were thinking along the lines of 8 feet. That's currently what's shown in the proposal, and that was to screen the existing buildings and help them to tie in with the rest of the site. As I mentioned, there's children, a lot of children in their congregation. So given that these 2 classrooms would be for those children, we are proposing fencing and gates to block off and make like a little courtyard there. Currently, that grassy area is used by families on Sunday. They come out and they have picnics. And so that would make that a safe place where the children aren't running off. Also, I'm not sure if you've spent much time on the property, but it backs up to the creek. And there are homeless and transients that move through this parking lot and spend time there. And so the membership's a little concerned about who's coming in and off the property. And so having those fences there will help to make that area a bit more secure. But if the commission feels that a lower fence or a lower wall would be more applicable, we're very flexible in what's going on there. And we do have preliminary landscape plans that are in the application. We're proposing the planting that Eric mentioned. And we're committed to making that corner softer and connecting with the senior care facility. One other thing I should mention also is that the church does have a very good relationship with the senior care facility. The care facility allows the church to use the parking on Sundays, and the care facility allows the church to use the parking, and the church allows the care facility to use their building if in the case of an emergency, if they needed to evacuate or relocate some of their residents. The manager of the care facility has a key to the church, and he's authorized to use the facilities in those sorts of emergency situations. And so we're maintaining an accessible path of travel between the 2 properties, just to continue to foster that relationship. And I think looking at my notes, I've addressed all the questions you had. If there's any other, I'm more than happy to answer them if there's one I missed.
Do you have any comments or questions for the applicant from commissioners?
Commissioner Sheeler, I do have a question. I guess to sort of clarify for you, Commissioner Schaefer's, Chair Schaefer's question about the neighborhood association, typically those meetings take place at night, 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, usually go to no more than 9 o'clock. And so, again, frankly, if you could carry that message maybe back to the church and see whether they could, would be willing to consider that accommodation for a neighborhood association, probably a meeting of no more than 30, probably less than that. I would be appreciated if you could maybe carry that back to them.
Yes, I'm more than happy to do that. And I'm not aware of the circumstances of what happened during that transition of the ownership as to why the community group was no longer able to meet at the church. But the pastor for the church, Chia Chu, he's got a very big heart, and I know he wants to be a good neighbor. So I'll definitely have that conversation with him. And I believe the resident across the street who reached out to the planning staff previously chaired one or currently chairs one of those neighborhood groups. And so I have her contact information as well, and I can help connect the 2 of them.
Just to make maybe a liability issue, they would be able to bring insurance that would cover them for that meeting. So it wouldn't be on the church to carry that liability.
Fantastic.
Just to clarify, the letter writer is no longer president of that neighborhood association.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions or comments from the commission?
I have no questions of the architect.
Great, thank you so much.
So I just have a quick comment with regard to that. I've actually met with Area 9 that met in that church a couple of times. I attended their meetings. It really surprises me that a church that might be interested in having local members join the church, that the church, since it's moved in there, seems less than inclined to invite the community in. And I would just encourage them to maybe look at the community, because the community is, in Citrus Heights, we have a very friendly community here. we're all very connected. We have our issues for sure, but I would certainly encourage the church to embrace their community where they're living. Certainly in their community is more than one assisted living facility that happens to be next door. So all I would say is, if moving forward, we'd like to see, they have another big project coming up. Let's see a change in attitude from the church with the whole neighborhoods and with the whole entire community, that we can all sort of get along, and we can all, as these projects come in front of us, I don't want to see this issue come up over and over and over and again, where we have issues where the church seems to be somewhat exclusive from embracing the community. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Before I do that, is there anything the applicant would like to ask or like to add?
I'll just respond to your last comment there. I agree wholeheartedly with that, and I will make sure that message gets communicated to not only Chia, the pastor, but also the other senior leaders of the church, and see if, and again, I don't know the circumstances of what's going on, but we'll make an effort, especially since we do have broader visions and goals for their congregation and what they plan to do. We'll definitely make sure that that's all taken into consideration.
Okay. One thing I neglected to do, Madam Secretary, is there any public comment on this issue?
There is not.
No, thank you, Casey.
Okay, the public hearing is now closed. If there's no further discussion, may I have a motion?
Do any commissioners wish to make a comment before we make a motion?
Go right ahead.
Okay, since no one else wants to, I'll make a comment on this. I've read the letter from the lady. I'm not going to mention any names. And I'm wondering very much if a little bit of this is she's very disappointed in that the church, which, by the way, as far as I know, has the right to refuse anyone to come in there if it requires additional manpower on their end of it, unless the neighborhood association wishes to cover for that cost. As far as the wall goes, since they're going to have small children in there, I agree, an 8-foot wall might be appropriate with the proper landscaping. See, what was the other one that was in there that I seem to have a problem with? As far as the zoning, she says she has a question about the R10 zoning on the east side of the lot. Seems to me we did something to that senior care center not too long ago. I remember right, about 5, 6, 7 years ago. Even though I agree that with her a little bit that the 8-foot wall may be extensive or a little too high, possibly, but once again, it falls within the zoning codes, what's allowed and what isn't allowed. And I can understand with small kids in there, I would like to make sure that other people didn't get in there. Sometimes I wish I had an 8-foot wall around my place because of the kids behind us that are throwing things over the fence. But let's see, this is going to be for their own members. As far as supporting business organizations and programs that respond to youth and family, that'd be policy 447.1. I believe, once again, it's up to the church to decide what they want to do. After all, it's like a business in a sense. If they decide that, once again, that it's going to require too much work, then they have that right. And I don't think that should be held against them. Right now, before I get into it any deeper, I'm going to go ahead and quit while I'm done.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lagomasino. Any other comments?
And when no one else making comments, I'll adopt resolution number 20 blank, finding that the project is categorically exempt from CEQA per section 15303 of the California Environmental Quality Act because it's new construction or conversion of, darn it, one of mine got blanked out, small structures. I understand that we need to do each one of these separate.
Yes,
Yep,
please.
I'm ready.
Have a second?
Second.
And Secretary, please call the roll.
Can we repeat who did the second, please?
That was me.
Sorry. That was
Andrew? Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Flowers?
Yes.
Commissioner Engel?
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Duker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Yes.
Chair Schaefer?
yes.
Commissioner Duncan is absent. We have a 6 vote. It has passed unanimously.
May I have a motion on item 2, please?
I'll further move to approve a use permit to allow for the installation of 2 modular classrooms
Thank
into
you.
an existing church property based on the findings and conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
Second.
Commissioner Lagomasino has made a motion and Commissioner Van Duker has made a second. May I have roll call, please?
Commissioner Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers?
Yes.
Commissioner Engel?
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Duker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Yes.
Chair Schaefer?
Yes.
Motion passed unanimously.
May I have a motion on the third item, please?
And I move that we approve a design review permit modifications to allow for the installation of 2 modular classrooms into an existing church property based on the findings and conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
Do I have a
Second.
second? Commissioner Lagomasino has made a motion. Commissioner Van Duker has seconded. May I have the roll, please?
Commissioner Duncan absent. Commissioner Flowers?
Yes.
Commissioner Engel?
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Duker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Yes.
Chair Schaefer?
Yes.
Motion passed 6-0.
May I have the next item, please?
Zoning code update, accessory dwelling units. The Planning Commission will review updates to Chapter 106.42.015 and 106.80.020 of the city zoning code and forward recommendation to council. The updates are necessary to bring the city zoning code in conformance with state regulations in regard to accessory dwellings. Environmental determination. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA under section 15282H, which exempts ordinance amendments for accessory dwelling units from environmental review. Project planner, Allison Bermudez.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Allison, or evening.
How are you?
Hi, Allison.
I'm trying to get my screen to come back.
Uh-oh.
There we go. All right. All right. And you can see my screen, hopefully.
Yes.
Okay. All right. As mentioned by the secretary, we're here tonight for a zoning code amendment. This is accessory dwelling units. This was on your agenda earlier in February, but got held up at the last minute. So we had to do some revisions. So we're back here tonight. And really this is to bring our zoning code into conformance with state law. As you've probably heard over the past few months, a lot of legislation has come through on housing units and specifically on accessory dwelling units. So January 1st, several bills were introduced and passed that are requiring these updates. So this tonight is a zoning code amendment. So you'll review the changes and then your recommendation will be forwarded to the city council for final action. And just to remind you, we call them ADUs now. So that means accessory dwelling unit. Previously, we referred to them as granny units or in-law quarters or second units. So there's been a variety of terms, but this is the newest term and this is how it's written in law. So we're referring to them as ADUs. So I'm going to use that term. So it is a small residential building that's placed on a property that typically has a single family house or some other living unit on it, and it's provide another living quarters on the same property. They can be relatively small, generally down to 150 square feet, all the way up to 1,200 square feet. They can have multiple bedrooms, and they provide full living facilities. So it'll be kitchen and restroom facilities as well as sleeping facilities. They come in different forms. They're a detached, which means they're a separate building from the main house. They can be attached to that house, or they can be interior or part of that house built within the walls of the existing residence. So here's some examples of ADUs. One, this is a detached garage that has some living space up above. So in the second story, you'll have a garage below and living up above. Lower shows a detached building that's a separate ADU, a little cottage, and then in the upper corner on the right there, you'll see one. This is being attached unit. So it looks like a garage was converted into a separate living unit. So they do come in all different forms. And something new that's also part of the legislation that will be in our code, we haven't had this before. This is called a JADU, or a junior accessory dwelling unit. And these are created interior to a home. So these are existing bedrooms that are converted to a separate living space. What's unique about them is they would provide somewhat independent living. So they are required to have some sort of cooking facilities. As you can see here, there's a microwave and a hot plate. They have a sink, a drain. So they have to have those minimal facilities. They do not have to have their own restroom facilities. They can share them with the main house. But they do have to have an exterior entrance. So you'd be able to enter into this from the outside without going into the primary residence. But this is called a junior accessory dwelling unit. And these, as I say, are converted from existing space within a home. Also, if you create a junior accessory dwelling unit in your home, you either have, you're the property owner, you have to live within the JADU, or you live in the primary residence. So one or the other does have to be occupied by the property owner. They also are deed restricted, that remains on the property's profile, that stays with the property as long as that JADU is there. It is restricted that relationship remain. So this is something new for us. JADUs in past legislation were always an option, and we did not include those in our code, but they are no longer an option and we must allow them. So we have updated our code to include this. And as you might know, the benefits, there's a lot of benefits to ADUs. They're becoming very popular because they are somewhat of a lower cost construction. You can buy some prefab units, you can stick build them. They can be a modular, pre-built building. So the cost is usually typically lower. You don't have to buy land, you already have the land. And then really the most common thing that we're seeing is allowing for people to age in place. People or family gathering on one property, and one family unit would live in the main house and other ones are living in these ADUs. We do survey ADUs when we get a permit for one. We do take a survey from those people, and most times, probably 90% of them are for a relative. And then also, if it's not for relative, is a way for income source. So people are creating these to help with their finances and creating an income stream on their own property. Some of the key changes that we saw in the legislation this year that have been incorporated into the code is we have a minimum size allowances now. So before we had a maximum size that is what we regulated the ADU by through a calculation. Now the legislature, they kind of changed that. They said you can have any size you want, but they told us we have to allow at least this minimum size. So we'll go through those steps here in a minute, but that's kind of different way of looking at it. They used to be restricted to 2 bedrooms. Now there is no limit on the number of bedrooms. It's however many you can fit into the space that you desire. They reduced the setback requirements that we had in place before, and several other steps, as you see here, that really just were meant to remove as many barriers as possible to encourage these ADUs, and so people would not be stopped really at the permit counter and applying for one. They just really tried to go through all the barriers and really open up the window to allow these and encourage these. A couple other things to point out, if you're familiar with RHNA numbers, our Regional Housing Needs Allocation. I think you saw that last month. Eric presented that to you, and that's the number of housing units that we have to provide space for to the state. Well, before ADUs were not counted towards that number, but now they are allowing them to be counted. So that's a good thing from it. All right. If you remember, in 2016, we did update our code pretty significantly on ADUs. At that time, when the legislation first started occurring, we did the legislation as well as we did kind of go beyond that and accepted some changes our code at that time. So some of the amendments that are proposed in the 2020 legislation we had already had in place. So that's a good thing. We were kind of a couple years ahead of it. So we already had removed the minimum lot size requirement. We already were processing the applications within 60 days. We removed the parking requirement in 2016, and we didn't have that owner occupancy requirement for a traditional ADU. So the new legislation that we have incorporated talked about the size allowances. So the minimum sizes we must allow. So before, we have a calculation of the ADU could be 60% of the size of the main house. So we went on this strict calculation with a maximum of 1,200 square feet. So now they said you can have 1,200 square feet, but you can't, that relationship, if that calculation is less than these minimum standards, you have to bring that up to at least these minimum standards. So basically everyone would be allowed, if they're gonna have 1 bedroom, any property could have 850 square foot ADU. If they propose 2 bedrooms, it's 1,000 square feet is the minimum size. So they can go up to 1,200 if they have the space on their property and their calculation allows it, but they have to be allowed at least 1,000. And in the staff report, I had this couple calculations to kind of demonstrate how that would apply. Lot coverage, which is the amount of property that can be covered by buildings. So the coverage would be the house, garages, barns, sheds, any type of building that sits on the property is counted towards lot coverage. So if your property is at its lot coverage capacity, let's say 50% of your lot is already covered, but you want to put an ADU on, and so the lot coverage would restrict that, we still have to allow you to place the ADU, but they do say 800 square feet. So if that couldn't be confusing enough, so those are the minimums that we will now apply and offer people to what they want to put in ADU. Then the maximum allowance is still in place. We're remaining at 60%. State law allows 50% calculation, and we are remaining at 60%. And then 1,200 square foot maximum for the detached units. And as also mentioned, they have lowered the setback requirements. So ADUs in the past were regulated by setbacks based upon the zoning for the property. But now it's written in state law that new ADUs would be allowed to be constructed with a 4-foot setback. So this would be 4 foot from the rear property line and 4 foot from your side property line. So regardless of the zoning, a new ADU would be allowed this 4-foot setback. In addition, existing residential accessory structures can be converted to an ADU. So this would be if you have a detached garage, maybe you have a pool house, or a barn or something like that on your property that's been an accessory, not an accessory living unit, but just an accessory building on your property. You are now able to convert that into a living unit regardless of where it sits on your property. In its existing location, you can convert that to a living space. And then if that barn is in poor shape, but you still want to have something in that location, but you want to be a living unit, you can actually now remove that building and still put it back in its same location. In the past, once you removed a building, the new structure had to meet current setbacks, but the law now exempts that from happening. So even if the building's removed, it can be replaced in the same location and be made into a living unit. An additional new thing, before ADUs were allowed on single family properties. So that would be a traditional single family home could have an accessory dwelling unit. They've also now expanded that to include all multifamily lots. So this would be lots that are built with a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, or even an apartment complex could also now add ADUs up to these calculations and these maximum numbers. So you see the push is really to encourage and increase the number of units through this ADU. One thing that the law did have is we are allowed to prohibit the ADUs from being used as short-term rentals. So this would be like for Airbnb use. And so we are including this into the code that all new ADUs that are built as of this year would be limited to not to be used for short-term use, or 30 days or more they have to be rented for. So this would kind of stop any situations occurring where people want to place these on their property and then they just become a rotating revolving door of tenants. So we want to encourage ADUs, but want them for permanent living. And so now with this provision, should you accept this, is one thing that we have added beyond the law, is that we would prohibit all ADUs constructed this year to be permanent living and not for short-term rental. Another thing I just want to cover with you, this is really not within your purview, but I wanted to make you aware of how extensive the law is, and then this will be going to the city council. So I just wanted to wrap you into it as well. Is part of the legislation did include verbiage on how we collect fees for ADUs. So previously, if you constructed an ADU on your property, you paid what's called development impact fees. And these are collected for a variety of reasons. They're road and transit fees, they're drainage fees, they're fees collected for fire facilities or park fees. So we collect development impact fees on most all projects. ADUs paid these fees as well. And they paid the same as a new dwelling unit as if you're constructing a new unit. So legislation to remove another barrier, they adjusted the fees and how we collect them. And so now if this ADU is 749 square feet or less, so it doesn't hit 750, it's 749, then no impact fees are collected. So they would be exempt from all these fees, drainage fees, school fees, park fees, all the impact fees that we collect. If the ADU is 750 square feet or more, then we can collect the fees, but they have to be in relationship to the primary house. So the law wasn't really clear on what that relationship is. So we went with the decision that these ADU fees that are 750 square feet or more should pay 50% of what a main house would pay. So not the full price of a single family, but 50% fee. So a couple examples is the previous fee could have been $34,323. If you recalculate the fees, it's $2,580. And then the ADUs under 749 would not pay that, and this ADUs greater than 750 would pay the $2,580, saving the $800. So it is a reduction for them. So this will be presented to the council as a formula that we're proposing. So I just wanted to let you know about this, because it is another way to promote ADUs and encourage them, is this reduced fees. And our general plan does encourage variety of types of housing opportunities, and ADUs is meeting that need, especially 25.1 that talks about a variety of housing types for location, cost, and design. And ADUs certainly do that. So there's the recommended motions. As I mentioned, this is a code amendment. So the city council will be taking final action on this at their meeting in May or June, and then 30 days following that, it would become part of our code. Happy to answer any questions and clarify any of that.
Thanks, Allison. Do we have any questions or clarifying questions or comments from commissioners?
I have a couple of questions for Allison.
Sure.
Allison, Michael here. How will this affect HOAs that restrict garages to vehicles only?
Well, part of the law, which I didn't put in there, is HOAs can no longer restrict ADUs. Before HOAs had kind of the veto power, and if they didn't allow these ADUs, then they could say no. Well, they no longer have that power. They have to allow them. So I don't know the specifics how that would work, but assuming that garage, it would be able to be converted to an ADU in an HOA is my understanding.
The reason I bring that up is just recently we approved the Mitchell Farms property for review. And one of the items that was mentioned in that was that garages would be restricted to vehicles only because of the parking situation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to change that particular item quite a bit, or it could. I'm not saying it will, but it could, which would increase the parking situation for that area. The other question I had was, I brought up garage. Do you say the minimum size for the ADUs in a garage were a minimum of 800 square feet?
The minimum we have to allow is 800. Well, depends. It's either 800 or 850, depending on their situation. Yeah. But that's what we have to allow. Doesn't mean they have to build it to that. Okay. But that's what we have to at least allow.
Yeah, most garages are somewhere around, double car garages that are built now is about 400 to 500, about 450 to 500 square feet. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
Allison, I had a question for you, and I'm sorry my light keeps turning off because I'm sitting too still. Couple questions, actually. So I think one of them was addressed. It seemed a little conflicting there about the fees in regards to the size. So in one comment you said about the 850 minimum, and then but there's fees imposed for anything less than 750 square feet. So is the 850 minimum detached, and the 7 and everything else below that would be attached? Seems
so the square footage is what we have to allow for them to build. So if they build a ADU that's 800 square feet, they will pay the fees.
Okay.
If they build something 749 square feet or less, then they would be exempt from the fees.
And you wouldn't have to allow that?
To allow the 800?
No, to allow anything less.
Well, yes, we would allow less. They can build whatever size they want. We have to say, we can't say that you can't build more. We have to say you're allowed to build at least 800. You can build whatever size you want.
Okay.
But we can't say, no, can only build 500. We have to,
I get it.
you have
Okay.
to at least 800. I know it's a reverse way of thinking that I'm used to. So it's been kind of challenging to get that to come out correctly.
That seems to me like the minimum
maximum.
could be, you know, you can build 100, right? You know, 100 square feet or anything above that, right? So the minimum stating it at 850 is very confusing. It's like, you've got to at least build that much or we won't allow it. So that's what that reads to me. So I would have a problem with that particular amendment piece because it's very confusing, I think, to the public as well if they were reading this.
Yeah, it's the way they wrote the state law. That's taken right out of the state law. So that's
there you go. That explains it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was my one question. The second question is in regards to the grandfathering in of some of the ADUs that are already in place. You said that you'd be issuing for those that are requesting permitting this year, the setbacks would be reduced to 4 feet. But then you also said that if someone has a barn, regardless of the existing setback, now what you didn't say was regardless of the permitting, is this a permitted dwelling that's been already in place that you're now grandfathering in, or does it matter if it's permitted or not? You're grandfathering it regardless of the setbacks. That makes sense?
We are going to say a legal structure, one that exists legally.
Legally, okay, so a permitted structure, I presume.
Yeah.
Okay, and that if that meets the requirements of, say, the setbacks, then that's grandfathered into whatever it happened to be.
Yeah, even if it doesn't meet our current setbacks, if it was built legally and it's fire safety distance, then they can convert it where it is in place.
Okay. And then I wasn't really clear too about how many ADUs that one might have. Would they, if they had an ADU, let's say they converted a garage, a detached piece of the house to an ADU, would someone then also be allowed to build an additional ADU on the property that was detached?
They can have one ADU. This is a single family home because it'll be different from multifamily properties.
Right.
But a single family home can have an ADU either attached or detached. In addition to that, they can have a junior ADU, which would be the one that 500 square foot inside. So essentially they could have two, one being the junior unit, which is interior to the house, and one regular, which is either separate or attached.
And is the junior unit restricted from having a bathroom, or it's just not required to have a bathroom?
Not required. They can only be up to 500 square feet.
Okay.
So.
But not restricted from having a bathroom?
No.
Okay, those are all the questions I had. Thank you. Very informative. Thank you.
Allison, this is Janelle. I had two questions. I think can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know off of mute or not. My first question, I don't think you addressed, and I thought that I read it when I was going through the packet in respect to height of an ADU.
I did not address that.
From what I'm remembering reading, the height of an ADU can be higher and closer to that setback than a single family res. So it seemed, if I remember right, it could be, was it 23 feet high or something like that? And right up and still butt up against the backyard fence at 4 feet setback. Is that accurate?
Somewhat, yes. So previously our ordinance allowed the ADU to be 20 feet and it would have this 5 foot required setback, but could be 20 feet tall. State law had a minimum that had to be 16. It can be taller, but 16. So with this ordinance, we are lowering that height limit to the allowed law limit of 16. So we are reducing the height limit because they have lowered that setback requirement to 4 feet.
I thought I read it the opposite. So no, that's good. Thank you. And then my second question, when you brought up, say, Airbnbs, and so that's not allowed for the ADU, but there's really no way to circumvent the property owner from moving into their new 1,200 square foot ADU and Airbnb being the primary residence. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
This would only apply to the ADUs that are built from this point forward.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Tom. I have a couple questions. And
Hi, Tom.
addressing Janelle's question, continuing with that line of thought, it also, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you build an ADU on top of an existing structure, the height limitation is 25 feet.
That is correct. Yes, so they do get an exemption to go a little, or if it's a second story, like in that one picture I showed that it was the second story of a garage. Obviously the 16 would not be enough, so they are allowed to go a little bit higher. I think it's 20 feet.
There are controls on the types of windows and whatever that would face the adjacent property. They have to be frosted windows or some kind of windows that would limit visibility out of those.
Correct. We still have that requirement. We had that in there before, and that's still in there.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And two other questions. As I recall, that the JDU can be sold. Is that correct?
That is a provision in the law. We did not bring that into our code. That was still at this point an option, but we did not wrap that in.
And do you know, is there any controls or requirements, I should say, for ventilation of the kitchen area in a JDU?
I don't know. That would be a building code question, but like in that example that I showed, it just requires cooking facilities. Okay. And that example, it was just a microwave. Yeah. So you wouldn't have that. But I assume if there's some sort of actual, gas or electric cooking facility, they would have to meet the building requirements for something. But it's very minimal cooking. When they say cooking facilities, it can be as little as a microwave.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Well, Allison, I got a couple of questions. How does this apply to prefabricated? If somebody wanted to bring a modular home onto the property, or a tiny home, something along those lines that are prefabricated? Is that prohibited under this?
No, we allow manufactured homes of all types, like you mentioned. The one thing that we don't allow, when people refer to tiny homes, a lot of time they're referring to those ones that are on wheels, that are movable. We do not allow those. So you can use one of those, but it would have to remove from the chassis and the wheels and placed on a permanent foundation. So it can be one, but it can't be the movable kind. It has to be secured. So it can be a manufactured home, a tiny home off wheels, or stick built.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions or comments for staff on this? If there's no additional clarifying questions from staff, I'd like to open the public hearing. Do we have any public hearing or public comment on this?
We do not have any comments.
I'll close the public hearing. And now the public hearing is closed. Is there a motion? Can I have a motion on item 1, please? You don't have to read the whole thing, just say, I want to make a motion on item 1.
I'll move that recommend that the city council adopt the resolution to find that proposed amendments are exempt from CEQA.
I'll second.
Okay, the motion is made by Tom Sheeler, by Vice Sheeler, and seconded by Commissioner Lagomasino.
Thank you, Chair.
Can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers?
Yes.
Commissioner Engel?
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Duker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Yes.
Chair Schaefer?
Yes.
The Planning Commission voted on a motion to recommend approval of agenda item 6B to City Council. The motion passed unanimously.
I have a procedural question for the attorney. I failed to read the appeal language after the first item. What do I need to do about that? And do I need to do the appeal language for each item on this motion?
No, because that is, I would call it an administrative item. I believe, in my opinion, is you can go ahead and read that now for the previous item and for this item. Or is there one related to this item or just for the first one?
Just for the first one, Ryan.
Well, I think you can go ahead and read that now and we'll make that a part of the record.
Thank you. This is any determination by the Planning Commission may be appealed to the City Council by filling a written notice of appeal and the appropriate filing fees of $250 with the city clerk not later than 10 calendar days after the date on which the determination is made.
We're good.
Kind of a motion on the second item, please.
Oh, it just went away. Very good. I'll recommend that the City Council adopt the ordinance to approve proposed amendments to section 106.42.015 and the following section.
I'll second again.
Okay, motion made by Vice Chair Sheeler and seconded by Commissioner Legomasino.
Thank you, Chair.
Can you please call the roll?
Commissioner Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers?
Yes.
Commissioner Engel?
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Duker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Yes.
Chair Schaefer?
Yes.
The Planning Commission voted on a motion to recommend approval of agenda item 6B to Council. Motion to pass unanimously.
You're almost done. Click the Add to Chrome button, then click
Hello.
Add Extension to continue.
Can I have the next item, please?
Zoning Code Update. Revisions to various sections of the Zoning Code. The Planning Commission will review a variety of updates to Articles 1 through 4 and Article 8 of the City Zoning Code. The proposed amendments include revisions to regulation of indoor commercial recreation centers, small recycling centers, and other various sections of the zoning code. The Planning Commission decision will be forwarded to City Council for final action. Environmental determination. This project is categorically exempt from CEQA under section 15061B3 the guidelines. Project planner Allison Bermudez.
Hello there. All right, we got more zoning code updates. These are kind of falling on the same night, so you're going to get a lot of them at once. So we do this usually once every couple years or so. We update the zoning code as things change. We kind of keep notes going on and then kind of bring them to you in groups. So tonight will be the first part of some amendments to the zoning code that we've been working on. You'll see another set come to you in a few weeks. But the first one tonight, we're going to look at commercial recreation facilities, indoor recycling centers, and then a couple other minor amendments. And as mentioned, this is for your review and final action by the City Council. So first to talk about commercial recreation indoor. This is a land use category in the zoning code that's used for commercial recreation activities such as bowling alleys, pool halls, skating rinks, all fall under the land use category, commercial recreation facilities indoor. We have another category called commercial recreation facilities outdoor. So this one's specifically dealing with these large venues that are inside. And through the land use table that we have in the zoning code, it determines that the location that these would be allowed and the locations that they are allowed, they would be required to obtain a use permit. As you can imagine, these are large facilities, large occupancy buildings, a lot of parking, maybe some late hours for this type of venue. So this use permit is required for those. But over the past several months, we've had a lot of requests for what we call them indoor commercial facilities, indoor because that's what they were, but they were really smaller types of venues. If you've been to an axe throwing room, an escape room, or the two, there's also one that you go and break dishes, like a stress relief room. I don't know, sounds fun to me. But there is, these type of venues are becoming very popular. And we've had a lot of inquiries from people wanting to bring that activity here in Citrus Heights. We think it's a good use. They would occupy smaller spaces, so could go in a commercial center and activate some of our centers that maybe have a lot of vacant space. But what our economic development department has really reached out to these type of users, but what has been the challenge is getting them to take the bite to go for this use permit. The use permit is the planning review application, and it does require that you see use permits before you, but they come with not only the processing to get to the hearing, but the price tag for them is about $10,000. So you can imagine for a small person wanting to start their escape room or their X-raying room, it can be a hefty price tag. So we wanted to come up with a way to encourage these type of uses, activate some of these spaces, but remove this price tag from them. And we kind of went down this same path for those that were on the commission a few years ago when we looked at brew pubs. We wanted some craft beer places to come into the city, but they required this use permit. And so that was a drawback. So that's when we edited the code at that time to really kind of define some operating hours for that use. So, okay, if you come in and you can operate under these regulations, we'll take away the use permit. So that's kind of what we did with this activity as well. So we're proposing an amendment that would break that commercial recreation facility into two categories. There'd be minor facilities and major facilities. And if you're a minor facility and you can comply with these guidelines, then this use permit would not be required. But if you're a major, then yes, you would require that use permit. So how we identified them is very similar to the brew pubs. These are going to be facilities that are small. They're going to be less than 5,000 square feet. They're going to operate no later than 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, no later than 11 p.m. on the weekends. Then they would be permitted to operate without the use permit. If their facility, even if they're less than 5,000 square feet, but they want those extended hours, then they would have to get the use permit. So everything else that normally would be classified as a major facility, the bowling alleys, the skating rinks, are still there and still require the use permit as they do today. But this minor facilities would not require the use permit. So the use permit would go towards those larger facilities and as well as any of these other minor facilities, but they want to go late night hours. Thought this was a good way to let the business kind of introduce themselves into the community in a location. They could come in, they could operate, till 10 p.m. till 11 p.m. on the weekends. And if business is good and they want to be open later or they want to expand to greater than 5,000 square feet, well, then they have the opportunity to come and get a use permit to do that, to go to the next step. So it would allow introduction of this business type into the community. So that's a proposal for commercial recreation. The next topic is recycling centers, and what we're talking about in this category is basically CRV collection centers. And so those are the centers that you see where you take your beverage containers where you've paid that redemption value on them, where you turn them in to get your money back. So these are not recycling centers like for other types of metals, are strictly the CRV redemption centers that we're discussing in this one. So we do allow those in the city. We actually have 3 of them here. Currently, our zoning code allows them to locate in any commercial zone They do have to get this minor use permit. And the minor use permit, that's a use permit like what you see, except it is approved by staff. So they go through very similar process, but we review it at staff level. We do a public notice on it. It just doesn't go before you at a hearing. So it is the time to process the application is reduced. So they are allowed currently in all commercial locations with this approval of the minor use permit. What we are proposing is to amend their allowed locations, and we're proposing that new ones would have to be located in a shopping centers of 3 acres or more. So this would put the facilities really in the areas and the places where the most containers are generated. So that's going to be, you're going to have a large grocery facility or some type of store that sells a significant amount of beverages. And that's really where the recycling center should be. They should be able to be redeemed where they're purchased. They're going to be located in what's called a convenience zone. And this is probably a term that you're not familiar with. We haven't discussed this before. So convenience zone is established by Cal Recycle. It's a state zone. And Cal Recycle identifies convenience zones as these facilities that generate the beverage containers. If they're selling beverages, or they're selling goods of $2 million more a year, then they're in this convenience zone. And that facility, that grocery store, let's say, just for ease, should have a recycle center within its convenience zone for its customers. So if you go to Rayleigh's, you go to Sprouts or something like that, you'll often see a sign in their store that says the nearest recycling place is such and such. And that's part of that convenience zone. They have to identify where the recycling center is within their area. So we want the centers to locate in those zones. It will meet the requirements that the grocery stores are needed, and it does encourage them in the places where they're generated. So we've added that as a locational requirement. We've also included that they must be separated by a half mile or more between centers, which with that 3 acre minimum shopping center size, that's really not going to impact them. Then we also have added in something new where they could also be located in a building. So they could rent a tenant space and be part of a tenant space, kind of like what Goodwill has done, where they actually rent tenant space. Someone could rent space and do their CRV redemption inside of a building. So we have added that as an element too. And as you can imagine, really having accessibility to these recycling centers is important. Consumers are paying money for these containers, so we do need to make these centers accessible so people can redeem and get their money back. But we also do have problems when they locate in areas that maybe aren't active enough or generating enough activity. And so they have caused issues with some of the locations. So we think with this new criteria, it really will focus these centers to be in these larger centers and more activity, and really in the location that's generating the beverage containers. So that's the reason for kind of narrowing their location down and not just allowing them in any commercial zone. Any questions on recycling before I go? I know it's kind of confusing one.
Allison, I do have a question. The recycling center that is very close to Mariposa and Greenback, it's sort of behind a liquor store. That's an existing facility. I'm sure that it's not 3 acres.
Correct.
There. I don't think so. Would that affect that business?
It won't impact the business as far as this goes, because if they are in existence, it doesn't impact them. If they happen to close for our code, I think it says 12 months, they can't reopen because they're non-conforming. So it won't make them have to close because of these amendments. But if they happen to close, they can't a new one couldn't reopen in that location.
Thank you.
Any other questions on convenience centers?
Actually, I had a question on the previous, on the recreation.
Oh, recreation. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't stop for questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question on those that are less than 5,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they would not be requiring a use permit, they would still be coming before the Planning Commission. Is that accurate?
No, they would not.
Okay, then I do have a
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
moving their time to 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday nights.
Mm-hmm.
If that's not going to come before the Planning Commission, I just remember living in Grand Oaks area when referees first came up,
Mm-hmm.
and all the neighbors, it was super noisy.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were open late, and then they ended up having to shut the back door, and there were things they had to do that ended up happening via city police, not really planning. And so I guess I would just wonder if those are going before the planning department, if that would be something that was considered, if they were backing up to like where the bingo hall is, bingo, and then park neighborhood back there.
Right.
11 o'clock to get pretty
Yeah.
noisy, and so that if it's not coming before the Planning Commission, I would just ask that something be considered in that regard.
So that's a great point. So they still would, even though they won't be getting this use permit, formal review use permit, they still are obligated to complete the cutoff, or some of the threshold really drops down. So any type of business, not just the commercial recreation, but any business is regulated by the noise ordinance. So we would have that avenue still, should something be a noise issue.
Okay. All right.
If they propose to go beyond that 11 p.m. or, on the weekends, or expand the hours or something, then they would have to come and get that use permit to do that.
All right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the other amendments that are proposed in what's seen tonight, personal services, we're amending that. If you remember, I believe it was this commission that made the zoning interpretation on whether microblading and permanent makeup was tattooing or not. And we decided that it was not tattooing. So I'm just getting the code caught up for that definition or that interpretation. And then we've clarified the definition of a pole sign in our signage regulations. Pole signs are signs that you see that are sticking up in the air on a pole. We no longer allow, but we didn't have a good, clear definition of that. So wanted to update that a little bit. And then we also did just put some clarifying definitions under vehicle services. We have a minor repair vehicle services, and we have major repair. And we wanted to include additional examples of what minor repair is, as that has come up a couple times on, what's considered minor and major, because they do have a different permitting process depending on how they're classified. So we wanted to clarify that. So those are the amendments that are proposed tonight. As I say, you'll be seeing in a second round in a couple months, but happy to answer any questions you have on any of these topics or any other comments on the zoning code that you have.
Any comments from commissioners? Additional comments or clarifying questions?
Allison, go ahead.
Sheila, one thing that I did find, no question really, but really sort of a comment, I did find it interesting and frankly somewhat satisfying to see that grocery carts would not be allowed to be used to transit the recyclables unless they had received permission from the owner of the grocery cart. So I did think that was a good item.
That was a police department. Really, that's their thing with recycling centers. They have a lot of problems with that particular topic. So we wanted to include something to kind of help with that. So that's what we came up with. So thank you.
Allison, I have are you going to be bringing back the sign pole pylon sign definition later?
No, I wasn't planning on it. Do you have clarification?
No, I'm going to have to do some research on that. Thank you, because I'm usually the one that has to enforce the sign ordinance for the police department
Yeah.
sometimes.
I know
So-
you know our sign code pretty well.
Anyway, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing and ask if there are any public comment on this item.
I don't have anything, Casey. Any public comments in the planning email?
There's not.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. May I have a motion on item 1, please?
I'll recommend to the city that the city council adopt the resolution on the changes to the codes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
That's a motion by Commissioner Lagomasino and a second by Commissioner Flowers. May I have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers,
Yes.
Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino,
Yes,
Commissioner Van Duker,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler,
Yes.
Chair Schaefer.
Yes.
The Planning Commission voted on a motion to recommend approval of Agenda Item 6B to City Council. The motion passed unanimously.
May I have a motion on item 2?
and I'll recommend the city council adopt the ordinance amending chapter 106.
Motion made by Lagomasino. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion made by Commissioner Lagomasino and seconded by Commissioner Flowers. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers,
Yes.
Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino,
Yes,
Commissioner Van Duker,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler,
Yes.
Chair Schaefer.
Yes.
The Planning Commission voted on a motion to recommend approval to City Council for item 6B. Motion passed unanimously.
May I have the next item, please?
Regular calendar, Planning Commission rules and regulations. Casey Kempinar, Planning Manager.
Thank you, Chair and Commission. In your packet, you had our update to the Planning Commission rules and regulations. It hadn't been updated for quite some time to reflect different things that the council's manual had been updated, but we wanted to be consistent with that to match our style manual, to match some of our policies regarding training and just an overall cleanup. If you have any questions or concerns, I'm happy to answer any questions or address any concerns, and we can. The council will be the final hearing body, and they'll review this in the near future.
Any clarifying questions for staff on this item?
no, it looks like most of the changes were cities, large capital, cities, small capital, a few other minor changes, but I don't have any problem with it.
Okay. And Commissioner Sheeler did ask me a couple questions about capital in lowercase, and I will double check and triple check that we got those all right with our style manual. Our policies changed. We used to capitalize all cities, and now we only capitalize certain ones. So I will make sure we get them all right when it goes to the council. So thank you, Commissioner Sheeler.
Thank you, Casey.
Okay. I don't think that there's any kind of vote on this item.
You're correct.
Okay. May I have the next item, please?
That's it, sir.
Very much, everyone, for joining us here, and I'm going to call the meeting adjourned at 8:42.
Thank you
Good
all
night.
for being so patient this evening and dealing with us while we worked through our little craziness. I appreciate your patience.
Yes.
Think it
Thank
went
you all
smooth
very
after.
much.
Great job, everyone.
All right.
Stay
Good
safe.
night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.